This is Matt from Hologram Electronics, and today we're going to be talking about how to use Microcosm's MIDI capabilities within Logic Pro 10. Logic is the DAW that I'm familiar with, but the topics we're covering today are pretty universal, so it'll be a good jumping off point for you to figure out how you might do it in Ableton, Pro Tools, or something else. First things first, you need a way to connect Microcosm to your computer via MIDI. A lot of audio interfaces have MIDI inputs and outputs on them, but some don't. If your interface does not have MIDI inputs and outputs, you'll need a dedicated USB MIDI interface. Of course, then you just want to make sure that the output of your MIDI device is connected to Microcosm's MIDI in to make everything work. Next, you'll want to choose the specific channel that Microcosm is listening to MIDI messages on. You can change Microcosm's MIDI channel by entering Global Configuration, moving the time knob, and selecting channels 1 through 16. That's all listed in the manual. Just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to set mine to channel 4 and hit the bypass switch to leave global configuration. Microcosm responds to control changes, or CCs, as well as program changes, or PCs. CC messages control the different parameters on Microcosm, such as filter, and the corresponding CC number for the filter parameter is CC number 8. MIDI CC uses values 0 through 127. A CC value of 0 for the filter parameter on Microcosm would be as if the filter is turned all the way down. Conversely, if I sent a CC value of 127 to the filter parameter, it would be as though Microcosm's filter is turned all the way up. So somewhere around 63 or 64 is the halfway point. It's a little counterintuitive, but that is the way that it is. Program change messages, or PC messages, change the presets on Microcosm. You can use PC messages to change between any of Microcosm's 44 factory presets as well as the 16 user presets. All of those values are listed in the manual. Now that we've gone over how to set up Microcosm and CC and PC messages, let's jump into Logic to see how all of this stuff works. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an external MIDI track. My Microcosm is connected to this Express USB MIDI interface, and it's connected to port 1. From before, you may remember that I set my Microcosm to channel 4, so I'm going to select that there. And for now, I'm going to ignore this Use External Instrument plugin and just hit Create. I'll hit the A key, or you can press up here to open the automation window. And just to make sure that everything is set up correctly, the first thing I'm going to do is go to this drop-down menu here and do Program Change. I will click into the timeline here to create a new automation. And as I move this, you'll see that Microcosm's presets are changing. One important thing to note with Logic, which is kind of weird, is let's say I have an existing automation for either a PC message or a CC message. And so program change 22 is Mosaic C. When I press the timeline, it will do that program change. If I decide to scrap my work and I just hit delete on the track itself, and then let's say I start messing around with Microcosm, change to a different preset, it's going to go back to Mosaic C when I hit play. That's because for whatever reason, the automation data does not get deleted when I deleted the external MIDI track. So I'm going to hit Command Z, and to get rid of all of that information, you just need to delete all of the automation data. I don't know why that is. Maybe there's a way around it. If you know a way around that, feel free to leave it in the comments. So one use scenario of using Microcosm's MIDI controls in Logic is to control a parameter over time using automation. Let's say I have a sound that I like. Yeah, that's a good sound. So then let's say I wanted to start the recording with mix at 0 and gradually have mix come in over time. So I would hop into Logic, and the CC message for mix is CC9. You'll just have to ignore all of these preset names. You can't change that. Just ignore it. So CC9, and create an automation point there, and an automation point there, And let's say over the course of this time, mix is going to go from 0 to 100%. And you can kind of check that by even just moving the timeline position pointer here. Yeah, let's just record something. So yeah, that wasn't super interesting, but it demonstrates that you can do it. Now, you could make this as complex or as simple as you want. So let's say you wanted to do more than one thing at once. What I would do is duplicate this. Let's say I want to change mix, space, and filter over time. I'll just go ahead and rename these tracks so that I can keep track of everything. This is mix. I'll make this one filter and this one space. Now, the CC for filter is CC message 8, and the CC for space is number 12. Let's say I wanted to extend mix out to that point, and I don't know, the filter, I'll start it halfway and work all the way open, and then space, I don't know, maybe just see what happens if I just did the opposite of that. Record something again. So yeah, that is how you can automate MIDI values on Microcosm. Just one more thing, just a tip about Logic that might help you tidy things up is selecting all of these, hitting Command-Shift-D, creating a folder, and then you could just rename this Microcosm MIDI, and that way kind of all exists under the same thing. I want to reiterate again, once you want to make changes to the automation stuff, you need to delete the automation data. You should not just delete the track itself. Logic has some pretty cool MIDI effects plugins that you can use, but you have to kind of set it up somewhat differently. In order to use the MIDI effect plugins, you'll create an external MIDI track, and you want to check this Use External Instrument plugin. You could set whatever input Microcosm is going into here. I'm going to leave it with no input because I'm monitoring another way. And again, this is where I'm connected. That's my MIDI device, and I'm on channel 4, and I'm going to hit Create. Now we can add MIDI effects plugins to this. A lot of these are more applicable to a synthesizer or a keyboard because a lot of these will modulate or change velocity or something else. But the one I want to show you is called Modulator, which is essentially just an LFO that you can assign to different CC values. So just to get oriented here, under 2 is where we will select the CC that we want to modulate. Let's do CC 8, which is filter, and I'll turn mix on Microcosm all the way up. And this is the rate of the LFO. This is in reference to the BPM of your project. I think you could probably, if you deselect that, you could do something else. Increase the speed. Can change the waveform of the LFO here. With these 3, you can make it stepped, which could be cool. With this last one, which is random modulation, you can kind of smooth that out a little bit. You also have output level and offset. So let's go back to this triangle wave shape. Let's say that I didn't want the filter to go all the way closed. I would move the offset up so that, let's see, if offset is at 50, then the lowest value it's going to go to is CC 63 or 64 or otherwise 50%. But it is also kind of hanging out at 100% too long now. So I'll reduce the output to 50%. And that way it's just going from 50% to 100% and sounds like this. Again, we could increase the rate. Let's change to a different preset, and I kind of did this in the multi-delay preset overview, which was, I was on Warp D and I was manipulating the time control and I thought it sounded cool. So time is CC10, and let's make this random, change the output level, make it more frequent maybe. I don't want it to go up to 8x too often. And then if we hold Alt while we click and drag that down, it'll duplicate it. Let's now change activity, which is CC6, but maybe do that in a more kind of linear way and a little bit slower too. Open both of those up side by side, and let's see what that sounds like. Now I think that time is changing too fast, so maybe something like that. All right, let's try now. You may have caught on to this by now, but I really like the RB preset, so I'm going to leave the same modulating settings in Logic and see what happens. I'm going to change this to filter, offset it, turn activity up all the way. Let's try Mosaic A, just leave it in there. I've added a fourth LFO now, and I'm going to be using the Mosaic C preset. The first LFO is modulating time in a random way. The second LFO is modulating filter, also randomly, but it's not going to drop below 60%. This third LFO is modulating the shape control, which will change the contour or the envelope of the resulting effect. And this fourth LFO is modulating the activity control, which for the Mosaic presets alters the number of active loopers. So as activity is increased, there will be more active loops going. As it's decreased, there will be less. And that will be modulating the relative complexity of the effect. It may seem a little bit subtle, but all of these work together to take an already complex effect and vary it even more. If you wanted to get even more in depth, Logic also has a MIDI effect plugin called Scripter that would allow you to create your own MIDI effects. This plugin uses JavaScript to create the effects, And Googling something like using Logic Pro 10 to send CCs to external MIDI device may help you find an open source script that you can just copy and paste into the scripter plugin. For instance, I found one that will allow me to control CCs for an external MIDI device using sliders, and that interface looks like this. I edited the code of this to change the name of the CCs and just use select ones that I'm primarily interested in using. And you can even use Logic Smart Controls to say, I want to learn this knob. So that knob controls that. You can do that for all of them. And then I've essentially created a preset. You could then save these settings and recall them later using this plugin, but this is not the same thing as a user preset because user presets also save loops. Just to clarify, this is something that I found on the internet and experimented with. Personally, don't have any coding experience, but in reading through forums and just reading the script itself, there are kind of instructions in it that helped me figure out what I might need to change to get it to operate in the way that I wanted it to. I did this more just to show you the possibilities that you can have with MIDI and creating your own effects if you want to get super into it. So I encourage you to explore your own curiosities and have fun with it. Anyway, I hope all that was helpful. If you have any tips or advice that you want to share about using MIDI in Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools, or something else, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And of course, let us know of any Microcosm topics that you'd like for us to cover in the future.